All right, welcome to our afternoon session of really cool speakers. My name is Mike Lottie. I'm the Senior Editor and Strategic Research Initiatives Program Manager at the Institute for Engineering and Medicine, which is a long way of saying I'm the guy that knows how to use commas, and I'm the guy that people call when they need to write a big grant. And when they need a little bit of extra help at the Inspire conference, they call me too. So we'll get started on right away with Dr. Erik Scott, who is a gopher, by the way, which is good, and he'll talk a little bit more about that and what he works on at Medtronic. So, Dr. Scott. I forgot to start your PowerPoint.
Can you guys hear me okay if I don't stand in front of the microphone?
Yeah.
We're streaming. Okay, well that killed that one. I don't like having
Where's my cursor?
a barrier between me and you, but we'll work with it.
All right, I've got a problem here. Hang on a sec. I can't find my cursor.
There it is.
Oh,
you're
but
on two screens.
I'm on two screens. Okay, so I got
Do you
to keep.
want,
There it is. Okay.
I'm glad it's you, not me. Oh, great.
Okay.
Okay. Hi again, everyone, and to those that are viewing remotely. My name is Erik Scott, and I'm very excited to be here. I'm super excited just to be in a room of people because we haven't had a lot of that lately. But truthfully, when I look among you guys, what I see is all kinds of energy and the future, and that really excites me. So the odd thing is I've been asked to talk about myself, and that's not the usual thing. So what I'm going to ask you to do is stop me at any time, and I do mean this, and either ask a question or bring up something that's way more interesting than me, because I will just bet you a donut that that's probably true. With that said, I'm going to give you what I've prepared, but honestly, so interrupt. In the event today, and you've heard a lot of stories about technical things and university things, some of us are going to talk about career paths or life paths, and so here's a little bit of mine. So starting kind of the beginning of the professional, we'll just go back to high school. I grew up in Superior, Wisconsin, which is right across from Duluth. So you see the Packer hat. So I'm a gopher and a Packer person. So we'll talk about dilemmas at some other time. But I like to do a lot of things outdoors as a kid, and I also like to tinker with stuff and break things and build things. In grade school, I made a model airplane in the basement that I could sit in and operate all the controls. And even though it never flew, it was a great vehicle for the imagination to think about principles. In that time, I was interested in flight and the mechanics of doing that. So actually, I wanted to be a pilot. I did not become a pilot, so that dream didn't happen. On the other hand, I went to college. I went to St. Olaf College, which is just south of here. And I feel very fortunate to have earned a scholarship from my town, from a very generous person that enabled that to happen. And that put me on other paths, studying physics and math, and also having opportunity to pursue things I loved, like skiing. And then also, a real formative thing was the opportunity to go abroad. I spent a year in England studying at the University of Lancaster. And I was teased horribly by people there until I learned that that was their way of showing that they liked you. That happened somewhere before I left. So I stay in touch. We just had a Zoom call with some of my best friends who are from England. Came to the university, and I knew at that point I wanted to work in the biomedical field. And to do that, hi guys, just find a seat anywhere. It's totally cool. To do that, the best way for me, having a background in physics and math, was to go into material science. So I studied material science, minored in biomedical engineering. The research that I wanted to do, so when you get a PhD and often in a master's, one has to do their own original research. And for me, I wanted to study the transport of ions, drug ions in particular, across skin. So treating skin as a membrane that has pores in it. And the tool that I was going to use to do this research didn't exist. We had an idea that a scanning electrochemical microscope could be built and that it could be used for this purpose. So something that hadn't happened before. I spent the better part of the first year designing and building that thing. And the picture you see was a real cool moment because that was actually at the moment when the very first image came off of my first use of the scanning electrochemical microscope. The peaks you see in that image that I'm holding are microscopic flow of ions through equally microscopic pores in a membrane. And the reason I saved this picture was it was a very special time for me, but it was also remarkable in one way, and that is after spending all this time just designing a thing and building it and going through lots of ups and downs to make that happen, when I actually started operating it, and it happened to be after midnight one evening in the lab, and you see a lot of straight lines and then you see a lot of peaks in that image. That was actually a pen plotter, a robotic pen, recording the data, one line at a time. And when that pen started going up to indicate these peaks, the first thing that came to me wasn't excitement, it was disbelief. It was like, this can't be, something must be wrong. That quickly turned as the image came clearer, to an incredible sense of wonderment, which is something that can be true for any of us in the work we do. And again, I just feel privileged for that one moment. The only reason that there was a picture to be taken was when you do graduate level research at midnight, you actually are in good company because it's very likely that there's other people in the lab at that time. Maybe not every night, okay, but at that night, one of my lab partners was there, and you happen to have a camera, and so we have that moment to share with you. I work at Medtronic. Medtronic is a medical device company. You may have heard of it. It was founded in the basement in not New Brighton, but just south of New Brighton, St. Anthony, by a gentleman named Earl Bakken. And he had a close association with the University of Minnesota throughout his work. And it went from being, I'm not joking, like a thing in a basement repairing stuff to now Medtronic's the largest medical device company in the world with very close to 100,000 employees worldwide. So I feel glad to be there. The work is purposeful. The majority of my life's work has been around, as the title was given, the Forever Batteries, is making power sources, so batteries, that make our devices work. Many of the Medtronic devices are implanted in people. So we're most known for cardiac pacemakers. Pacemakers are devices that will take a heart that isn't beating at the right rhythm, very typically too slowly, and giving electrical pulses to it to bring it back into rhythm. And it's very likely that someone in the room has a family member who's got one. Oh, or has one. Wow, okay. Wow, I hope it's helping you.
Oh, yeah.
Look at this.
Well, I'm here today, so.
Totally normal. That's awesome. Wow, that's super awesome. My dad has one. So that was exactly why I went into that field, was the opportunity to help people, people like you. You see a picture of my family. I'm very privileged to have a wife and two daughters. One just graduated from college and one still in college. If I can make this go, otherwise I'll just do it this way. So, funny thing happened 2 years ago. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to 3 people, kind of to share it. They came from 3 different continents for an amazing invention. So I'll stop right there and say, why do they give the Nobel Prize, seemingly, to old people? Is it because they like old people better? I don't think so. There's kind of a couple things. So in order to have a Nobel Prize, two things have to happen. One is you have to come up with something brilliant that no one has done before. And the other is it has to change humanity in a really important way. And both of those things, so having a career long enough to develop a brilliant idea into reality, and then to have it accepted and used and changing the world takes time. So I've been privileged to be in the room with two of these people. The one on the left, Professor Goodenough, who's 100 years old this year, and the one on the right, Stan Whittingham. And I'm very familiar with the work that they did. And I just hope that you appreciate this, the lithium-ion battery, because of what it's done to change. So they used science, took decades, and now what do we have? Oops, okay, the video, you guys, okay, great, thanks. So things that you might take for granted, but I don't, that are made possible by the improvements in battery technology, particularly the lithium-ion battery. We would not have our phones in our pockets. We would not have our phones on our wrists were it not for this. There were batteries before. They were just so crummy. I mean, the first cell phones were the size of a brick, the weight of the brick, and they worked almost as good as a brick. Okay, I kid you not. Electric vehicles, you know, the revolution in electric vehicles, lithium-ion battery. And then, you know, what we all hope for is that our future on this planet is enabled by more use of renewable energy, which gets generated perhaps by the sun and wind, but needs to be stored. And lithium-ion batteries are one of the best things we can think of right now to help store that energy, or at least will show us the ways to even better things. So Nobel Prize, lithium-ion battery. Let's come back to medical device just for a second. The devices shown here, and I hope you'll appreciate this, are subsequent generations of implantable cardiac pacemakers just over 50 years. And the different battery types I've shown in the captions to indicate that in order to get our devices to work better, to do way better things for you than they did when they were first invented, to last longer, to be smaller, are associated with improvements in the technology inside. You guys hear probably about Moore's law, so that's improvement in electric circuits in computers. These have computers inside them, so they are benefiting from Moore's law for sure. But also the battery technologies that got better and better. Fun fact, you see the second one, plutonium. So we actually did have nuclear-powered pacemakers for a very brief period in the 1970s. They lasted and lasted and lasted. So honestly, so like the longest life pacemaker ever was in the 30s of years, and it was a patient who got one of those in the 70s. Now, we didn't sell a lot of them, and we stopped selling them for really good reasons. So plutonium, you know, kind of radioactive, kind of heavy, right? They were actually heavy pacemakers. But the problem of disposal was really hard. So at some point, everything we do is going to be done. And so how are we going to extract it from a patient? Perhaps they're alive, perhaps they've died, and make sure it never, ever, ever goes into an incinerator or gets in the hands of people who want to do nasty things with plutonium. So that kind of came and went. Lithium batteries, lithium iodine in particular, was a very robust chemistry from the 70s that we still do. And then finally, and the reason I list this at the far right, lithium and then CFX SVO hybrid, and I won't explain what those are, but I'll just point out, because I hope you feel this is remarkable. We've gone in 50 years from a pacemaker that's the size of a hockey puck and lasts maybe, if you're lucky, 2 years, so not you, okay, but in those early times in the 60s, to one that's the size of a vitamin pill and lasts 15 years. Okay. And we're not done. That's just where we are now. So this is why I you can tell, get kind of excited to talk about batteries. So specifically about my own work, more recently, I take very little credit for what I was showing you in the last slide, but this is something I'm very connected to. The overdrive battery, which powers our neuro devices today. So you heard about neurological things this morning. And I have to just pick one to talk about. So I'll talk about a product called InterStim Micro. InterStim is a therapy. It's a therapy that we do. We apply electrical pulses, in this case not to the heart like a pacemaker, but to nerves coming out of the sacral spine. So the sacral spine is like the lowest part of your spine. And the reason that some people need this is they have urinary incontinence, which is not a topic we talk about a lot, and certainly not a ton at lunchtime. But the thing is this, people who have this are in suffering, just like any other disease. And there's a lot of them. By that I mean, there are more diapers sold to adults in this country than there are diapers sold for babies. And if that's a surprise to you, that's fine. That just means that this is kind of a silent thing. Wouldn't it be nice to have a therapy that wasn't diapers, that a very tiny implant, it's a little bit bigger than a vitamin pill, but not a lot, thanks to improvements, including battery improvements. So that's InterStim Micro. It recharges and is used in a way that goes far beyond the battery technology that's used in our latest phones. So in particular, a few things. The typical patient will recharge this weekly, and it'll only take 20 minutes to recharge it. Now contrast that with our computers and phones, which is typically probably a couple hours, if you're lucky, maybe 1 hour. Doing that and not hurting the battery is a really big deal. Doing that for 15 years and not ever affecting the battery is a very big deal. So back to the forever battery, we actually, with data to support our claim, because that's what you do in the medical field, if you make a claim for a device, the federal government says, well, you better back it up. So we're claiming that this is a zero fade battery. And what that means is it doesn't wear out. In the 15 years use cycle for this, it behaves on day one just like it did on the last day. And that's what that graph is showing, by showing the capacity, which is a measure of the charge or energy stored by the battery over and over. So how did we do that? I can tell you some of my secrets because I think it's kind of interesting. We had to change things. We had to think differently about the world from the way that people had thought about it before. Every lithium-ion battery that you have on one of your devices is of a typical design which uses a carbon or graphite anode. An anode is one of the electrodes inside a battery. So think of it as the negative pole of the battery. Graphite's a very special thing. One of the things that makes it special is it loves to take lithium ions inside of it, and that's part of the chemistry of how the battery works. Now what happens though is that if you look at those black planes, those are planes of carbon atoms that want to fit purple lithium in. So charging the battery is bringing lithium ions into the anode. Discharging is letting them go. What's happening to those planes? They're growing and shrinking. They have to stuff the lithium in. That's fine. Chemically, that's fine. But it leads to a cascade of processes that wears out the battery. So why does your cell phone battery wear down? Well, there's several reasons, but one of the big ones is the graphite anode. What we did differently is used a different anode material, lithium titanate. So lithium titanate, lithium, titanium, and oxygen in a very special crystalline arrangement. So solid materials are like molecules, but the atoms are arranged in a very regular order. The lithium can come in and out of lithium titanate without the crystal growing and shrinking. And that's the reason we call it a zero strain material, but it's the reason that that battery doesn't wear out. This was not an obvious thing to do. And it also took a lot of years to get it perfect. And the details of that are beyond what we have time to talk about here. But this is how I'd like to just close and say, you know, this is a quote from Orville Wright. You probably read it already. One of the inventors of the airplane just over 100 years ago. And what he said is, and I don't know if you guys follow airplanes like I do, but a lot of people said that airplanes weren't going to happen or shouldn't happen. either impossible or humans were just not meant to fly. And of course, the Wright brothers made that not true. And what he said was, if we'd worked on the assumption that what was accepted as true really was true, no progress would happen. And so I hope that's something of an inspiration to you, and I also hope that when I look out at you guys, that the accomplishments that you come up with, even though you might not have imagined them yet, will be, you know, way more amazing than anything you've heard of by any of the speakers today. And it actually is possible. It's a question of will and effort and curiosity. So thanks for your time. Be happy to answer questions.
Here's time for one or two questions, and make sure you speak up, and please make sure you repeat the question.
Oh,
for
yeah,
people online.
great, yeah.
Go ahead.
So, what are the possible or what are the disadvantages of a battery that has no strain or no loss and you can charge it 20 minutes?
Well, you know, all those things that you said I would call advantages, but it's a really good question because I think in anything you engineer, there's always going to be some trade-off somewhere else. So I'll just tell you what the trade-offs of overdrive are. One is that it's a more expensive battery to make, and so we probably won't see these in electric vehicles for that reason. We can afford to put them in medical devices, but that's one of them. The other is it's a lower voltage battery. It's a 2.5 volt battery rather than a 4 volt battery. That's not inherently a problem, okay? But it does lead in some instances to lower energy per unit volume than other opportunities. And if that's what's most important to you, then go use something else. And if you want it to last forever or can be miniaturized, then overdrive's kind of interesting. Yeah, great question.
A lot of people say that like solar and wind energy is great, but not really realistic. Is a forever battery a way that we can make it more realistic to store?
So the question, I'll repeat, is you know, a lot of people are doubting that solar and wind or other renewables are realistic, and would overdrive help make it more realistic? And my short answer is I sure hope so. And I've talked to people kind of around the country about this idea. It hasn't caught on yet, okay? But this is what we do, right? We imagine things, we try things, we test them. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But you know what? Even if it's not about overdrive, I also believe that all knowledge is cumulative. So the lessons we learn, perhaps even from the failed experiments, are the things that'll help us figure out what the next thing is. So yeah, thanks for the question.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.